Their faces stare out at us, frozen in time. We never knew them, and yet they have always been with us. They are the founders of MACC, the visionaries of the place we call home. And although their voices have long since been stilled, each Sunday we see in this place their hopes, their dreams, and their God. This is their story, but it will become our story. Although Madison Avenue Christian Church first opened its doors in 1913, its origins are much earlier. In the years following the American Revolution, the nation experienced a dramatic religious rebirth, often called the Second Great Awakening. One of the most famous revivals took place in 1801 at Cane Ridge, Kentucky, the home of Presbyterian minister Barton Stone. The revival was enormous, involving as many as 20,000 Baptists, Methodists, and Presbyterians. Uplifted by the success of a gathering of Christians from different denominations, and troubled by the Presbyterian Church's adherence to rigid creeds, Stone and several other ministers withdrew from the Presbyterian Church. To stress their desire for unity, they called themselves only Christians. Meanwhile, in Pennsylvania, clergyman Thomas Campbell and his son Alexander soon broke with the church in support of open communion, creating a second unification movement. Alexander Campbell gained much publicity with his journal publications and his celebrated debates with figures such as social reformer Robert Owen, and he soon became viewed as the intellectual head of the movement that came to be known as the Disciples of Christ, though followers were often labeled Campbellites. Clergymen such as Raccoon John Smith and Walter Scott also became central figures in the movement. In 1832, Barton Stone's Christian Church and Campbell's disciples united to form the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. The new movement emphasized unity of all Christians, rational thinking, and an intellectual outlook, publishing journals such as the Christian Standard, the Christian Messenger, and the Millennial Harbinger, and affiliating with institutes of higher learning such as Bethany College, Lexington Theological Seminary, and Transylvania. Considering that the Campbell-Stone movement was centered in Kentucky and Virginia, it's hardly surprising that Covington became the home of one of the earliest Christian church congregations, a direct predecessor of MACC. In 1827, local businessman James G. Arnold founded a small Christian church, although it was later wiped out by an 1833 cholera epidemic. In 1840, he restarted the congregation that we know today as First Christian Church.
There was a pretty famous cholera epidemic about 1833, and it wiped out basically the congregation. Apparently it didn't wipe out James Arnold, but wiped out the congregation. And the next information that we have, about 1840, he decided to start it up again. And then I believe the church was, he actually built, more or less, a church in 1843 on 3rd Street. The original church met on 2nd Street, probably pretty close to where the Marriott is located. And then later on 3rd Street, he built the first church.
Arnold had close connections to church leaders. Around 1830, Alexander Campbell himself addressed the tiny congregation. Later, Raccoon John Smith would visit, and in the early 1850s, Walter Scott served as a minister to the congregation. In 1867, the congregation built the first of two buildings at the 5th Street location that is still home to First Christian today, although the original church burned in 1893. The church grew rapidly at 5th Street, but by the 1870s, divisions arose. In 1874, Minister John I. Rogers resigned, and the decision was made to rehire P.B. Wiles, a previous minister.
So the church decided to call back Reverend Wiles, and apparently there were some people in the congregation who were not particularly interested in having Reverend Wiles back again. Wiles had already given his, had already agreed. He was also willing to back out as the split approached in the late 1874. But the people in the church, the majority at least, still wanted him back. And so in January of 1875, about 60 people withdrew from the congregation at the Christian Church, which became First Christian Church, and formed a new congregation. A lot of fascinating things. While some of the things that have come down to us historically as far as the reason for the split, they mentioned a disagreement over open membership. I'm guessing that that may have had to do with possibly the idea of whether a person had actually been baptized or not. Also, the use of a single chalice. I don't really know which side we may have come down on, but I do know that when our church was built, we have these nice little receptacles for individual cups. So a lot of speculation there.
Leaders of the new church moved quickly, meeting first at Cooper's building at 6th and Madison, and then purchasing the old Presbyterian church building on 4th Street. James Challen, a notable disciples minister who had started at least 10 churches, became the first minister. 4th Street Christian, as it came to be known, included many of the leading members of the old 5th Street Church, but at 150 members was only about a third of the size. The building was old and only a block away from the disciples' congregation at 5th Street. By the late 1880s, the congregation had started to look for a new home. In 1891, the congregation considered selling the building. 2 years later, the original church building on 5th Street was destroyed by fire. Although the two churches considered reuniting, the merger never happened. A Kentucky Post article from the summer of 1893 reported plans to build farther south in the city, but the deal to sell the building to a local African M.E. church failed. As the 19th century came to a close, 4th Street Christian found itself at a crossroads. The church's ministries had begun to stabilize, but the congregation found itself trapped in an outdated building as the population continued to move southward. While the dawn of a new century may have seemed promising to many Americans, members of 4th Street found themselves wondering what lay ahead. Soon enough, and with God's grace, they would find new leadership with a great vision for the future.